Hi, I'm writer and actor Tom Conkle, and you are listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Hey gang, and welcome back to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo. I'm your host, Mike Jozic. Thanks so much for joining me. I've got another great interview lined up for you guys this month. Right from the get-go, from day one, I've always said that I wanted to talk to people from all walks of Scooby life. I wanted to talk to animators and directors and writers and musicians, and at some point I'm probably even going to start bringing in members of the fan community and just getting, everybody, throw the kitchen sink at it. And this week's interview is no exception. A couple episodes ago, I interviewed writer James DeMatteis, who writes the Scooby Apocalypse comic books. This month's interview is with writer Glen Dakin. And Glen, he's done a lot of work. He's worked in comic books, he's worked in television, animation. He's done a lot of these DK books, and that's kind of what we're focusing on. That's why I contacted him. He wrote and collaborated on the Scooby Doo Essential guide that came out back in 2004. And I don't know if I'm sure some of you out there probably have this book. It's a little on the light side, and it is very definitely geared towards younger readers, but this is something that was put together by people who genuinely love this franchise, love these characters. If for nothing else, the cross-sections that they do with Funland and the Spooky Mansion and, going through, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen, like, those Star Wars cross-section books, so detailed, and they took so much time. So I had a great conversation with Glen. We talked about the Essential Guide, but as I said, he's worked on, Bob the Builder, Shaun the Sheep, so he has experience in animation. He has experience with this process, and he knows what he's talking about. And he has some opinions about Scooby-Doo. He's been a Scooby-Doo fan for as long as I'm sure as any of us have been. Like me, he goes back to the early days of the show, and he really appreciated the chance to talk about one of his favorite franchises. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy that. I enjoyed expanding, the range of people that I'm talking to once again. And like I said, it was a great conversation. And I'm going to just stop talking about the conversation because it's coming right up and you guys are going to listen to it. And you don't need me to tell you what is in the interview. So as is our way on a podcast named Scooby-Doo, I will let you guys get into the thick of it. And I will shut up and meet you on the other side. Keep it real.
Okay.
So, did you want to just start with the questions, or do you want to...
Sure. I'm happy just to go in and chat if that's how you do it.
Okay.
If you want to introduce yourself and tell me a tiny bit about yourself.
Well, I'm obviously Mike. Basically, just been kind of a Scooby-Doo fan my whole life. I was looking for some podcast ideas. I have another film podcast that I do, and that's what I did. And I'm kind of a special features junkie. I love behind-the-scenes stuff. I'm an animation fan. I have a history degree. So yeah. I kind of thought, there isn't really a lot of material out there where people have talked to people who've actually worked in the franchise, either comic books or animation.
That's one of the things about the animation. I think as a kid, it was so utterly sort of opaque. You had absolutely no idea how it was. Who was behind it. There was no. Like I'm a big fan of Marvel comics, and you in Marvel comics you always had Stan Lee kind of telling you who he was and that he did all the comics, and it gave you that feeling of contact.
Yeah.
But with animation like Hanna-Barbera stuff, it was just this blizzard of unlikely sounding names at the end of the show that went by like lightning, and you couldn't believe it'd taken so many people to make this show. And I used to kind of think a lot of the names were probably made up, because they didn't want people to poach their staff, so they put up a blizzard of pseudonyms at the end of the show. But it's probably not true. But
I also got frustrated with Warner Brothers particularly seems to be less than interested in doing any kind of added value material on any of the DVD releases, whether it's like the straight to DVD movies or the series, releases.
No, it's nice when you can get that stuff. I mean, I bought the was it the 50th anniversary version of Jungle Book, and there was some amazing, backup stuff on there about how there was a missing pseudo Beatles song that was supposed to be in there with the four vultures, supposedly being the Beatles, and how Disney had seen this song, this beat song that Disney people had created, and he thought it was a passing fad that would be forgotten next year, and told them to replace it with a barbershop quartet. So the one thing on which Disney was wrong, the Beatles weren't gone in a year, but it worked very well as it was. But it's quite fun. It was quite fun to see the the Beatles version of the Vulture song. But
Jungle Book was the last one that Walt actually had a hand in, wasn't it?
It might have been. I'm not sure. I remember seeing a wonderful documentary about they tried to create something faithful to Kipling, and he kind of came in and saw all the storyboards and sort of said that isn't how this is going to happen, and kind of added the magic. I mean, it's one of my favourite movies, the original Jungle Book. So I'm certainly not complaining about that.
Right. Well, usually the first question that I ask anybody that I talk to is basically, what is your history with Scooby-Doo? When did you first come into contact with the character or the show?
Well, you mean in a non-professional capacity as a kid, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, I have quite a good story about this. I remember it was just before Christmas, around about 1970, 71, and I was out in the park playing football in the snow with my big brother, and we came home and we put on the telly, black and white telly, and there was this program we'd never seen before in our life. We sat down and watched it, and we were both amazed at, how kind of original and funny it was. It was nobody had ever really. I had never seen a cartoon before where it was funny and an adventure at the same time. It was a mystery, and it was wacky and funny, and it kept you interested in lots of different ways. And we looked at each other at the end, and we were like, "What was that?" I was about 9 or something at the time, 9 or 10.
Do you remember which episode it was?
It was the first one I saw was the Funland episode.
Oh, nice.
With Charlie, the robot, running around. And I can foul play in Funland.
Yeah.
That was my first one, and it was just that we watched it for 2 or 3 weeks, and we were surprised at how the ghosts and monsters actually looked quite cool. They didn't look as silly as monsters and ghosts normally did. The styling of the show. A faint echo of Marvel Comics, I thought. And in fact, I think one of the guys who drew for Marvel Comics worked on the pilot of Scooby-Doo.
I remember thinking that Funland was an interesting... It was an episode that really stood out to me because Charlie wasn't... I mean, he was the villain, but he wasn't actually... No one was trying to do anything bad. It was just a maintenance robot kind of run amok.
Well, one of the things I think it's a bit like with Ghostbusters, how on Ghostbusters, the movie, they kind of updated the whole idea of ghosts, put them in a modern urban setting. And I think in Scooby-Doo it was a surprise because it was a kind of spooky show, but they just threw in aliens and robots, and it was very, it was great fun, it was very, very inventive. And that was something you'd never really seen before, a creepy, spooky atmosphere, but with a robot sort of walking around in a strange kind of way, that sort of strange, stiff kind of way. But it was very original and very fresh, and I think it was very clever what they did with Scooby-Doo. They sort of updated the whole area of spookiness, brought it into the malt shop, and there's one episode, isn't there, with the fake aliens that are created with their flying saucer, so it just suddenly sort of freshened up that whole area of spookiness, and as a kid it really amazed me. I'd never seen anything like it.
One of the things I was thinking of when I was coming up with the questions, the origins of Scooby-Doo are kind of rooted in a lot of Americana, with that Archie's DNA and that Dobie Gillis DNA, and I was wondering, is the British Scooby-Doo experience any different? Was there any kind of cultural dissonance there, or as kids do you just absorb it and it doesn't matter?
I guess funny enough, the Archies weren't very well known, in the UK. We used to get the banana splits and the Secret Squirrel and stuff like that. and Top Cat, the Flintstones. But for some reason or other, the Archies was never that well known in the UK, and so we didn't really we weren't really aware of that side of things. So Scooby-Doo did seem to come completely out of left field, really. Normally the cartoon characters were animals or cavemen. They weren't modern day kids. And so it was very, like I say, at the time it seemed very fresh and interesting. We didn't have that awareness of the American culture that it was coming from. So in England we thought all American kids drove around in a van solving mysteries. So
I guess there is a bit of a gothic kind of ghost story aspect to it that might appeal to a more transatlantic audience.
Well, it was a mixture, wasn't it? Some of the episodes were just straightforward spooky castles, and others of them were, like I say, were science fiction, and it covered just about everything, didn't it? The mummies and Dr. Jekyll and a kind of Yeti thing, and it was that one of the things that was good about it was you never knew any week what was gonna turn up.
Now, were you a fan of any other Hanna-Barbera shows at the time, or was Scooby kind of the top of the heap?
Well, I grew up watching all this stuff. I can remember, actually, this probably isn't even Hanna-Barbera, but do you remember The Impossibles? It's a very old cartoon show where the characters were superheroes and pop stars at the same time.
Yep, that's Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah, vaguely based on the Beatles. They had those sort of mop tops, and I loved that when I was a kid. And I used to watch, that came along at a show with Ataman and Secret Squirrel over here. And we didn't get all the shows, though. Some of them was infuriating. You'd pick up an American comic and it would say something like, this is the Saturday hour, and you'll get to see the Jetsons and Space Ghost, and you'll get to see, we often didn't get to see them here. But we did get to see, we got to see Top Cat to the point where we knew, where he's called Top Cat in England because, it was called Boss Cat in England because there was already a brand of cat food called Top Cat, so they couldn't call the show Top Cat here, so it was called Boss Cat. We pretty much knew those off by heart by the time we were 12. We'd seen them to death. That was a very, very high standard on Top Cat. I used to love that. Obviously the Flintstones, and those are the main ones. Wacky Races. I used to love all those shows. I was a sucker for cartoons. I think one of my favourites, although this was slightly later, was Dastardly and Muttley and their flying machines. I just think that was hysterical.
There's a really interesting... Have you seen the Garth Ennis comic book that just came out?
I know that DC have been doing a range, haven't they, of like versions of Hanna-Barbera things, haven't they? I've seen a cover. I think one of my friends did a Muttley alternate cover.
They did. There's of course the Future Quest and the Scooby Apocalypse and the fantastic, an amazing Flintstones comic book. It's honestly one of the best things I've read in years. They've just come out with a miniseries written by Garth Ennis for Dastardly and Muttley, and it's bizarre and it's fantastic.
That might be the one that one of my pals, Liam Sharp, is a comic artist.
Yes.
I think he did the alternate cover of Muttley, I think.
For the first issue, yeah.
Yeah, I always wonder. I'm a bit surprised they've never tried to do a Dick Dastardly movie. You get all these like Despicable Me, and they've tried to do Yogi Bear, or they've done Yogi Bear, and they've touched on some things. But I would have thought Dick Dastardly would be a natural for a movie.
I think a lot of those properties they've tried. There was a Top Cat movie that came out a few years ago. They just don't throw much money at them, or they sort of subvert the original formula that made people fall in love with them, or they want to make it extra hip, or like they're having so much trouble right now with they want to make a Hanna-Barbera universe of films, starting with this movie Scoob, which was supposed to come out I think in 2018, but now it's like pushed to 2020.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of second guessing of of what made the thing good in the first place, because people want to show that they are doing it ironically, and they don't want to be they want to be cleverer than the preceding generation, or they want to show that they're cooler than the preceding generation, and they sometimes underestimate just how good the original thing was. Yeah. And like you say, they try to subvert the agenda of it, so you would have a Scooby-Doo show where everybody is empowered and everybody is appreciated, and they can't you can't do something with a kind of a purer cartoonish sensibility where some guy has to be the sad sack and somebody has to be the coward or whatever. They have to rethink it all. in a contemporary way, which takes away some of the magic source that made it work in the first place.
Now, let's flash forward to the early 2000s, and you get the call to work on this Scooby Doo Essential Guide.
Yep.
What attracted you to the Essential Guide project? It was kind of outside the stuff you'd sort of normally worked on at that point.
Yeah.
Was it not?
Well, I had done. I just started working animation myself around about that time. I've been in the UK. I'm working on children's shows like Bob the Builder and Postman Pat, and I think I was just starting round about then to work on Shaun the Sheep, and I was beginning to do books about animation, Essential Guides for DK. I'd done Finding Nemo book, and I'm not sure if I'd done Disney Villains at that stage or not, but they got me to write these essential guidebooks to either it was a big new Pixar movie or if it was something perennially interesting, and of course with the tie-in with the Scooby-Doo movie, the new Scooby-Doo movies coming out, the obvious thing to do was to do an essential guide to Scooby, although we kind of cheated a bit and we decided not to make it a very thorough guide. Rather than having it about everything, we just kind of made it about the original classic setup, the classic series, and then the movie. We put in some stuff about the new movie, but we didn't make it an exhaustive study of all stations in between, because we realized there wasn't really a consensus among the age groups or the fans as to which bits of it were any good, but everybody loved the original series and everybody was excited about the movie, so we decided to go for those two kind of bookends, build the book around that.
I did notice it was geared specifically kind of to that first 2 seasons of Where Are You, and then it kind of snuck some of the Monsters Unleashed, the second Scooby-Doo movie, kind of in the back door.
Yeah, I mean, we did mention some of the, Scooby's relatives along the way, and, but it was really about the classic original Scooby that everybody sort of knows and loves. It's been on telly here so many times that every generation, I mean, and probably the kids growing up now are probably the first generation not to see it because it wouldn't look so good on HD TV, I'm guessing, but that's what we decided to do, and that seemed to work pretty well.
I did find that Doo Dynasty section kind of fascinating because it how do I phrase this? You were kind of trying to bring together that whole family tree, and as you said, there's a lot of, it's a divisive thing, it's fans, some fans are cool with it, some fans despise it.
I know, well, we had a bit of a debate as to whether or not to mention Scrappy-Doo in the book, because a lot of people over here, thought that was kind of like the jumping the shark moment where it spoiled Scooby-Doo. But it turned out that the designer of the book was actually a particular fan of Scrappy-Doo and was really upset that there were some discussions going on that Scrappy wasn't going to be in the book. And my son at that age, we were watching cartoons and stuff, and he actually used to laugh, used to like Scrappy-Doo. Only when he was quite young. So in retrospect, I think it would have been a bit like not mentioning Jar Jar Binks, wouldn't it? Doing a book about Star Wars and not mentioning Jar Jar.
I find that, I'm not personally a great fan of Scrappy, but I think it was less to do with the character itself and more to do with just that factory style of animation that Hanna-Barbera was producing at the time, where they didn't put a lot of, there wasn't a lot of love in those stories. And once you lost the rest of the gang, and it was just Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy, you sort of lost. It was all gag men. There were no straight people.
Yeah, I think this is the problem that you get when things have to be changed. I mean, I have this thing working on Bob the Builder where, sadly, you get to a point where you can't sell another series of the show unless there's a change in it, because the networks are looking, why is this one different? Why can't we just rerun the old ones?
Right.
So when you create a new series of the show, you're under pressure to make it different in some way. So I think that was what explains some of what's gone on with Scooby-Doo, whereas most people would say, like you've just said, you need the straight men in there. Shaggy is a lot funnier if you see him in contrast with the cool, sophisticated Fred. You've got two sides of human psyche going on there, and that's what makes it funny. I mean, it's one of the things that I didn't like about having Scooby Dumb in the show, which was you've got somebody whose job it is to be dumb. Well, Scooby would sometimes do dumb things in the original series, but if you have another character in there who always does those dumb things, then it becomes too predictable. The camera will go across to that character, and they'll say or do something stupid, and then it's like you need even in the silly cartoon show, you need more rounded characters and more unpredictability. Otherwise, you can't catch the audience out and make them laugh.
Absolutely. Reading the guide.
I'm not going to talk about Dixie. I'm not going to talk about Dixie Doo and Ruby Doo. I refuse to discuss them.
That's fine. I won't press it. Reading the guide, I noticed it's very much geared towards a young audience, and I wondered, was that fun to do, or was that an obstacle? Like, would you have maybe preferred a deeper dive on the characters in the world?
I would have done, but I guess there's a whole different book to be created there. It was explained, obviously the editorial. I wasn't the editor of the book, and they planned what they thought would be the best family kind of book for the family to buy at Christmas kind of thing, which would have a bit of nostalgia and a bit of information and a bit of fun in it. But it certainly wasn't. Certainly could have been more in depth if it was a more out of universe book discussing the characters, but it was written like in universe, so like Scooby's real name is Scoobert, that kind of thing, rather than discussing how he was designed and things and that kind of thing.
The name thing, actually the statistics for all the characters, or the biographical information, was interesting as well. You mentioned Scoobert, which brought me to that. I mean, the addresses and stuff, was that all? This was all
kosher. This was all given to us by by Warner Brothers as the Bible, the Scooby Doo Bible. We weren't allowed to just make up anything, of our own. I mean, I was allowed to invent, some of the like on the van, on the mystery machine. I was allowed to use my imagination, but the illustration were provided through Warner Brothers, by their own approved art studio. So it's all kosher Scooby Doo information. It's not something we just cooked up to amuse ourselves.
So Fred living on 123 Tuna Lane, that's canon.
That is, that's we didn't make that up ourselves. That was absolutely, that's where he lives. If you go there now, you'll probably find somebody, with his mail, holding his mail, and he'll have moved on somewhere, or it's more at market now. He's probably living in Seattle or something. I don't know.
Now, how much of the book was, I hesitate to use the word dictated, but you obviously said the publisher kind of had a mandate of what they wanted to use. How much was you contributing sort of new material, and how much was just sort of
none of
blanks?
None of it was dictated. We kind of chose what the editor Catherine Saunders. I worked with her on a couple of books. We chose the subjects. We watched all the shows. We were given all the original scripts, which was great, and
I'm so jealous right now.
we worked out what we wanted to say, and basically they had a chance to read it and approve it at the end. So some things we got out of it. We had the official Scooby Doo Bible from Warner Brothers, so they told us, that Freddie lived at 123 Tuna Lane, and we believed it. So
what does the Bible look like? Is it just like a document, or?
It's a bunch of it's like all TV show Bibles, a collection of text pages telling you what the background is on the character, and they're always different from show to show, but
right.
it would I mean, even now I can't even remember if I was given it or whether I can't really remember now, but I can certainly remember having all the scripts, because I read through them against watching the shows to make sure they were correct. I didn't want to say, sometimes there's a mismatch between script and a broadcast, and I wanted to make sure they were the proper, they were authentic. So, they were the authentic scripts, and they were very interesting, because on one of them, this was the very first script, the characters' dialogue wasn't as interesting in the script as it was on the TV. For example, Shaggy would just say "yikes," and then "yikes" was overwritten with "zoinks." So, and Scooby would talk just like an ordinary person in the script. What are we going to do now? And somebody had scribbled over that with with the Scooby-ish way of talking, with the words beginning with R or whatever. So it seemed like, it looked to me like maybe the voice artists, or there'd been a later discussion, had added in some of the colour to the script themselves that wasn't in the original script.
That's interesting. I do know with the new Scooby-Doo show, the writers are told not to write in the Scooby language with the rut-row, leave the R's out, just write it as regular dialogue, and the voice actor, Frank Welker, is the one who's supposed to interpret it. So I wonder if that was the same deal with Don Messick.
I guess so. But it was interesting. I think I had to give all the scripts back in the end. But the original scripts didn't have zoinks and rot-ree and stuff like that on them. They all had the actual original clear dialogue, and then it was doctored later on to give it the colourful style.
Did you find that the scripts were very close to sort of the final product, or were there a lot of differences?
Absolutely. No. The scripts were the same. They were the proper recording scripts. Yeah. And in the end, I kind of stopped going through it. But at the start, I was very anal about it, making sure that the TV show that had gone out was the same as the script, because I didn't want the book to be, didn't want to be caught out when the book came out and people saying, Velma didn't actually say that.
So you said that you went back and you watched the original episodes with the scripts. Did you kind of have to go through them over and over again, or was it just kind of like a single pass?
Yeah, there were some of the ones I went over and over because we were creating these artworks, and we wanted them like A Night of Fright is No Delight, and we were working out what actually happened in this castle and what so we went through all the rooms and what because obviously in the animation they just create a load of amusing sequences. Perhaps they don't actually have the problem of making any of the locations viable. You just draw another room. So we tried to work out how the buildings, like Funland, we went through everything that happened in the episode and made a note of the major locations and stores and stuff in Funland, so that it would be included in the illustration. So we went pretty thoroughly over those episodes. But some of the other episodes, where we were just writing up, a ghost like Dracula or the Puppet Master or whatever, I might have just watched those 1 or 1.5 times, kind of thing. But I don't forget this was on the basis of having already seen these shows almost every year for a large part of my life, so I knew them pretty well before I was given the job.
Was it, considering Funland was your first experience with Scooby-Doo, was there a particular delight in kind of going back and doing that cross-section?
Yes, I mean, I was really pleased that we got to do that one. Like I said, I think one of the things that struck me about it was such an unusual thing to do, a spooky thing about, really. It sort of modernized it, and having a robot in the show, which was about ghosts, it was kind of a strange kind of cross-genre sort of thing. So, and it's something I'd always liked, so I was very pleased that we got to do that one.
Those cross-sections are actually, they're pretty amazing. I really, really enjoyed just sort of poring over them, and one of the questions I was going to ask was, did you have a part in kind of doing all the labeling and everything? But
yes,
it's nice to see that there was a real collaboration there.
Yeah, we I contributed ideas to what should be in the illustration, and then I wrote all the labels, and obviously the editor kind of went over it at the end. They might have added a couple of things if I'd left a gap, but mainly it was we kind of poured over it ourselves and tried to get everything in the right place, and things like that are great fun to do the notes, and that's something you have to do on quite a lot of these DK books. They're famous for their notations. I've just had to do one, a new Pixar movie, Coco, all about the Day of the Dead.
Right.
And so I've had the scripts, for that movie, and we've created a book about that, and we've had to do all that. We've just been doing all the notations for that.
Did you have much communication with the artist, or did you work primarily with the editor and then?
I worked through the editor, and the artist and the artist studio work through the designer of the book, who was Kathy Tinknell. So the way it worked, because I wasn't in house on this, I was a freelancer working from home. So I come in for a couple of meetings, and do most of my work and research from home, and then in house at DK, the designer would have dealt with the art side.
I was also curious at the very beginning of the book, the ordering of the characters. Obviously, Scooby-Doo is first. With Fred being ostensibly kind of the leader of the gang, I almost expected him to be first. I was wondering if there was, I'm using the word mandate again, to sort of order them that way, because Shaggy and Scooby
I think
are kind of the main...
I think it's just that there's this big thing about the friendship between Shaggy and Scooby is kind of like the heartbeat of the show.
Right.
So I think the thing is to put Scooby and Shaggy first, and then the others afterwards. And I think in people's minds, you think of Scooby and Shaggy, don't you? When you think of Scooby-Doo, and it's perhaps the more hardcore fans who would know everybody else by name. I think that was basically it. It was the Shaggy Scooby pals, the pals act of those two. That's the heart of the show, which they would want up front in the book.
Was working on this guide, was it a quick job? Was it a long process?
I mean, there's kind of a bit of a run-up on this one because of watching all the episodes. So it was sometimes it does take quite a while, but then you get this kind of panic where they want all the text in by Tuesday kind of thing. So you sometimes get a long run-up on something. I mean, I did something sort of like Big Hero 6 book, and suddenly you seem to get ages. You got sent all the sort of wow art and all the world concept and all these lovely paintings and drawings of the settings and all the costumes and all the characters, and you're able to look at that for ages, and then suddenly when the finished artwork comes in, it comes in very, very late because the studios always want to hang on to the images until the very last moment to make sure they're absolutely as good as they can be, and they suddenly release a flurry of images right close to the print date, and you find you're having to tweak your captions and change pages because you've had to withdraw an image, or you've had to update an image and it's slightly different. So there's a kind of like, sometimes there's a nice long sort of amiable run up, and then there's a last minute panic at the end.
Are you happy with how the guide turned out? Was there anything you wished would have gotten in there that didn't?
I guess I kind of would have liked maybe a bit more from the latest movie. It just seemed to me that we really didn't get given many images. We were hoping to get a lot more. And I think looking back on it, it's always the same. It seems like whoever you do one of these essential guides for, they're very reluctant to release the actual images of the movie. They keep them under wraps until the last minute. But then a year later, it's all gone to DVD. It's all yesterday's news. And I think it spoils the books a bit that the studios are rather precious about the images, because in a very short space of time, they're all out there. So the books could have been better. And I was really glad we actually used screen grabs, shots from the actual show, because it gives you the feeling of watching the original shows. But perhaps we could have. I don't know if there was a way we perhaps could have augmented them a bit. I'm not sure. Maybe nowadays you could put up those images and Photoshop them and recolor them slightly so they're a bit crisper. But I think it was a nice mixture. I was actually delighted because I was a little bit worried about doing the book because there is a certain amount of less brilliant Scooby-Doo out there over the years. Yeah. But I think what I absolutely loved about the book was that it concentrated on what I thought was good, which was the early days. And to me, it was it was a great pleasure to be doing it.
So just before we close out the interview, I always ask everybody a couple of questions, just sort of general questions about the franchise. First being, what is your favorite Scooby-Doo show, iteration?
Well, my favorite show is definitely the original Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And
what would be your favorite character?
I would have to go with Shaggy, I think. To me, it was a quite like a revelation to me. I'd never seen a children's show before where one of the heroes was allowed to be a coward. They were always the model of the hero. They were always, Batman and Robin. These people who solve mysteries were always heroic, and it was a slightly unreal. And although obviously Scooby-Doo was done for laughs, I found it extremely refreshing and relatable that one of the main characters in it was a coward, and shamelessly would just run away and not do what he was told by the others. And so I think I have to say Shaggy was my favourite.
Iwao Takamoto would argue that Shaggy and Scooby were the smartest of the group because they ran away.
Yes, well, they're a strange. They're a strange bunch of kids. They've got this great self-assurance that they're going to solve these mysteries, and they never expect to get into any trouble or any comeuppance to fall upon their heads, But Shaggy and Scooby, I think, have the right idea. You have to be scared of the monsters, or it's no fun at all, is it?
Last question: What do you feel is the secret to the longevity of this franchise? It's coming on 50 years now. It's just as popular, if not more popular than when it first came out. It just doesn't seem to go away.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes you could say, there are just great characters. It's like there are certain things that come back, like Sherlock Holmes and Batman, and that every generation comes up with its own version of these characters. And rather than being a throwaway set of characters, the Scooby-Doo characters have turned out to be in a similar vein. That it seems like every few years someone wants to bring them back and slightly reinvent them, but they're strong enough as concepts, to stand any kind of regeneration and still work pretty well. So, a brilliant invention, I would say. And also, you've got the classic setup, which is of people versus monsters, people versus creatures, which it's a genre, and that goes through poetry and Greek mythology, and it goes right back through, Sherlock Holmes, The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's what could you call it? It's a kind of theme or a topic that endlessly entertain mankind, and Scooby-Doo is a kind of modern day descendant of People Against the Unknown, isn't it? But it has normally has a nice reassuring ending, but it turns out to be a projection on a screen or a balloon with a floating by with a sheet over it or something.
So it's a combination of timeless archetypes and endings that...
a brilliant concept, I think. I think people can underestimate sometimes just how good an original idea can be. But I think with Scooby-Doo, it was a brilliant idea, and the characters were very well thought out, and it has stood the test of time.
Excellent.
Okay.
Is there anything? Are you on social media? Do you want people to find you online?
Well, people can check me out on my website, which is www.glendakin.com, and you can see the books I'm doing on there. And people can just check me out through my website if they're interested in seeing what other stuff I've done. I've written for Marvel Comics. I've written a children's novel series, Candleman. I've done loads of books of very strange and silly kinds, which people might be interested in, and lots of TV over here in the UK, stuff like Shaun the Sheep, and I've done a load of work recently for the Angry Birds people. So there are lots of stuff there people can check out if they're interested.
Yeah, one of the things I run into when doing these interviews is I'm always talking to people who have tons of other stuff that they do, but because of the Scooby-Doo focus, we basically just talk about Scooby.
Well, that's good, because it normally turns out with me, it's normally Shaun the Sheep, because I write all these other things, and whenever anybody talks to me, as soon as they find out I've written Shaun the Sheep, that's normally all they want to talk about. So for me, it was a great and very nice change to talk about Scooby-Doo.
And with that, thank you so much, Glenn, for sitting down and chatting with me. This was great.
Thank you. It's been great fun talking about the book and talking about Scooby-Doo. It is a great. I've always, it's always been something I've been very fond of, and it was nice to be reminded of the book. I just wish I could find those scripts. I don't know. I think I gave them back, but I spent about half an hour in my loft looking for them. I was sure I kept back a few. They'll probably turn up one day when I'm looking for something else.
I'm so jealous. All right,
okay,
take care, Glenn.
Cheers. Okay, I look forward to seeing how you edit it up. Don't be frightened to chop a lot out. I know sometimes we can ramble on, but it'll be nice to see it when it comes out.
It's all good.
Okay, bye.
And there you have it. That was my interview with Glen Dakin, author of the Scooby Doo Essential Guide, which was published in 2004 by DK Publishing. As I said in the intro, if you don't have this book, at the very least, it's worth taking a look at. There's some fun stuff in it, and like I said, those cross-sections, really well done. They're beautiful, the mystery machine, and it's also just kind of crazy looking at some of the addresses for these characters in Coolsville that are supposed to be canon as per Warner Brothers. That just kind of like blew my mind a little bit. I also wanted to just apologize to you guys a little bit for the potentially boring beginning to the interview. Glenn obviously took the first shot throwing that question out, looking to get a little bit of information about me. I know you guys have probably heard all of that before. If you're a first-timer, maybe you haven't, but the whole origins of the podcast and why I'm a Scooby-Doo fan and why I'm doing the podcast, I've said that so many times on so many episodes previous to this. I actually genuinely felt a little bit bad when I was editing and going, oh man, this is going out there yet again. But there was other stuff kind of we were talking about there that I didn't want to take out, and it just sort of figured I'd take the hit. Figured you guys would probably be forgiving, and it just kept the casual, organic flow of the conversation. So there you go. And speaking of editing and cutting and stuff, there's been some conversation over on the Twitters, and some people have asked or commented on the stuff that doesn't make it into the podcast. The not entirely Scooby-related or ancillary conversational stuff. I know exactly where you guys are coming from. I love to hear everything. I'm an interview junkie and a behind-the-scenes person, and when I dig something, I keep digging. I dig until I'm way over my head and 6 feet under, or whatever metaphor you want to throw in there. I'm an archive rat. I'm a researcher. So yeah, I get it. I might look at some of the stuff when I have some time. I might look at them. I'll consider it. I have actually considered a Patreon account, and that might be an interesting thing to have as kind of a bonus through that. I don't know. I'm still not convinced about the idea, but I'll think about it. So if you're curious about Glen, as he kind of outlined at the end of the interview, there is places you can find him, www.glendakin.com. A lot of information on him there. He does have a bunch of books and comics and shows and stuff that he's worked on. He's been around, he's done some work. It's worth checking out. He's not just the Essential Guide guy. So I'd encourage anybody and everybody to hunt some of that stuff down, take a look, support Glen, keep yourself entertained. It's a win-win. And that's pretty much a wrap for me. I'm keeping it kind of short and sweet this month. If you like the interview, or if there's anything in it that you wanted to talk about or comment on, feel free to find me on social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, at Scooby-Doo on most of those. Otherwise, you can just search a podcast named Scooby-Doo. Let me know what you think. If you get the show off of iTunes, if you download or stream from there, if you're there, I'd love it if you rated and reviewed the show. It helps kind of get the show noticed in the podcast standings as far as Apple's concerned. And getting the word out is what it's all about. So hit the like, follow, share, subscribe. Share on your social media. If you're enjoying the show, if you think the conversations are worth sharing and you know somebody who likes animation or Scooby-Doo, let them know it's out there. And really, that goes for like any of the Scooby podcasts that are out there. There's so many of us right now, and there's so much good conversation going on in the Scooby podcasting community. Spread the love. We can only benefit from it. And since I now officially feel like I'm talking borderline nonsense, I'm going to bring this episode of the podcast to a close. As always, it has been a singular pleasure doing these things, making these shows, having you guys download and checking them out. Thanks so much for your support. I hope you will join me next month when I'll have another great Scooby-Doo related interview. I've got a couple people in the pipe. I'm hoping to get those dealt with shortly. So long, take care, and we'll see you next time on a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Probably.
Everybody cheer!
This is how we solve the mystery. This is how we solve the mystery.
So in summation, this narration is my donation to the art of mystery solving dictation. And here's what the bad guys say when they play where the law forbids.
Would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
This is how we solve the mystery. Bye.